Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Command Q, the podcast for quitters. We're your hosts. I'm John Pelfrey.
And I'm Maari Casey.
And today we're talking about disasters and how to survive them. Question for you, Maari. In an Oregon Trail scenario, do you think you'd be the last one standing, the first one to go, or somewhere in between?
I think I would be somewhere in between unless there is a need for marketing or t-shirts at the end of the world, in which case I think I would still be standing and I would have everything covered.
Nice. Well, I've always thought that I'd be the first to go. I just didn't really want to see the Oregon Trail terrible scenario. And so I figured I'll just volunteer to go out early. You can have my stuff.
Dysentery.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you can just come to my house and take my stuff. Lucky for us, today we have a special guest. His name is Craig Caudill, and he's going to help teach us how to sharpen our survival skills, how to expect the unexpected, and how to quit being unprepared when things go wrong.
Yes, please help us welcome Master Survivalist, Instructor, Author, and Director of the Nature Reliance School, Craig Caudill.
What's the longest you've been completely off-grid?
When I was a young man, I did a couple of sabbaticals. I went out for 30 days on two different occasions with nothing but a knife, walked out in the woods and lived off the land for 30 days with a knife. To put it succinctly, that's how I am where I am now, because the first one was fairly easy because I went spring, summertime. And it was, the weather was fine. The resources were fine. There was no real hard issues. My ego got a hold of me. I went back to do it in the winter and nearly died. Seriously, nearly died. Didn't eat for 3 weeks. Nearly starved to death because I didn't know what I was doing. I thought I knew what I was doing. I didn't know what I was doing. It's one of the things that built the foundation of the way I teach, the way I write. It's part of all my books, how to control the ego. How to not let the ego drive you, but how you control your own ego and stuff of that nature. So, 30 days to answer your question directly.
Wow, that story sort of sounds like the Into the Wild story, where the guy went to Alaska and didn't know what he was doing and lived in the bus and then died.
Yeah, that's an interesting story. I followed that closely for a couple of reasons. One, my in-laws lived in Alaska for 20 years, and they actually knew people that knew some of the details that Krakauer didn't write about. I really like Krakauer's writing. I was gifted that book years ago. When I first read it, I really liked the story. I held him in high regard for what he did. The older and what I would consider more mature and hopefully wiser that I've become, the more I think he's an idiot for what he did. He just really put off his whole family. He left a lot of people thinking and worrying themselves literally into depression and death over him. And I would have done the same thing if I had died. And I guess that's why I was sympathetic to him early on. But later, I don't hold what he did in very high regard. There's a better way to do that. I actually do that for people now that want to go off grid and live off the land. We have backup ways for them to go off and live off the land after we've trained them. That way, they do have a backup. They don't go about it in a wild manner the way that he did. Mm-hmm. So, right. We could probably talk about that for a while.
Yeah,
I know we want to get into other topics. There's a lot of things that he did. He did a lot more things wrong than he did right, in my opinion, both socially with the people that surrounded him, from a practical standpoint as a woodsman, as an outdoorsman. He just did some things that were really stupid. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of people that have died. There are people that have died because they tried to get to where he was. Right. There are people that have experienced tragedy and death trying to emulate what it is that he did. So I'm just not a big fan of that situation. And I'm really definitely not a fan of Krakauer writing what he suspected to be the truth and not knowing the truth at the time. Sorry, I'm out of tangent here.
It's interesting, though, because you bring up a good point. This actually goes into one of our questions, too, that just media around survival. And this kind of leads into the trend of homesteading and people who are just like, I'm going to buy 10 acres in eastern Kentucky and just going to go at it, even though I've never left suburbia. Like the trending of homesteading. And then we were talking about just the general survivalist shows, like what your thoughts were towards shows like Naked and Afraid and those kind of things. Because they can lead people down really dangerous pathways where it looks great when it's set to music and a nice moving picture, but in reality, it's dangerous.
And you have a backup executive producer that can helicopter you out of there.
Yeah, and thanks for bringing this up. I'm actually writing a piece for a blog, Havoc Journal, about survival versus homesteading versus preparedness and readiness. There's a lot that goes into it. And man, you caused a lot of thoughts there that are worthy of discussion. But let's try to break them down. One, survival is basically trying to take care of your needs if you go into a wilderness survival event. Disaster readiness, we all need to be prepared for disaster readiness. That's, whether it's an earthquake, a tornado, flooding, whatever. You all have experienced some of that down in North Carolina recently. And in homesteading, I'm seeing this. I actually interviewed somebody for my YouTube channel recently that was new from suburbia, and they've gone to live off the grid. You could just see it, that they're doing good. It's just they're tired and they're wore out, and it's just not what I call SPL, sunshine, peace, and love all the time. It's just not cute. I mean, it's hard work. The native peoples, the indigenous cultures that lived off the land for thousands of years had a very short lifespan compared to ours for a lot of reasons. And one of them is because it was very difficult to live off the land. So whether you're farming, I grew up farming, homesteading, doing wilderness survival, just preparing yourself for, disaster events. All of it is difficult if you just try to eat the whole elephant. But if you eat it bite by bite, you can accomplish what you need to do. We all need to have the skills to take care of ourselves.
Absolutely. What do you think holds people back? What are a couple of things they're just not prepared for? Is it lack of knowledge or an assumption that something won't ever happen to them? What are those types of things that are the warning signs? If you're talking to somebody and you're like, whoa, wait a minute, you're not ready for this.
One of them is lack of knowledge. You don't know what you don't know. And some people are okay with that, and they seek out people like me to help them, whether they read my books or watch my YouTube or come to my classes online or in person. Some people seek that instruction out, and I'm very thankful. The other is that people don't know how to prioritize what I refer to as their needs. Most people think the most important thing is food. And realistically, it's not. We eat on a daily basis, sometimes multiple times a day. That's a habit we formed. Therefore, we think we need that. Frankly, we don't need that to stay alive. So most people in your survival or disaster readiness are really focused heavily on food. And I'm not saying it's not important. I'm just saying it's not the most important thing. Safety and security is number one. Number two would be sheltering, whether it's your clothes or whatever shelter you have. Water would be next, and then food is after that. Therefore, I think some people just straight up get their priorities wrong. If you look at the data in let's call it an industry, the survival industry, 80% of the money is spent on food, which is crazy to consider. That most people that are going to get a go bag or whatever, a survival bag, then every one of those people are going to put food in it. And realistically, most of us are going to deal with 2 to 3 day survival situations at the most. We don't need to eat in those 2 to 3 days, but we probably will have to have water. We'll definitely have to have shelter, and we definitely need to have good situational awareness to pay attention to our surroundings and not get hurt or injured or worse. And therefore, those are our priorities. And so that's critical that people understand their priorities.
So let's talk about that. Let's walk through maybe a scenario here in Western North Carolina. We had a big hurricane that dumped a bunch of rain. There could be all kinds of things. You could end up in a plane crash like those guys did in the Andes several years ago, whatever it is. But let's just take a general situation where you all of a sudden are stuck in a situation where you need to survive. Walk me through what you would do in that first day.
Great question. Let me step it back a little bit with what you said. The Andes plane crash, that's the anomaly in the data. I have a degree in statistics, so I'm always thinking about all these subject matters as it relate to statistical likelihood. That plane crash is the anomaly. What happened to you all in Western North Carolina is not the anomaly. It might be for that specific region, but nearly all of us are going to deal with some sort of natural disaster at some point in our lives, whether it's tornadoes or earthquake or flooding or whatever, even just severe storms. So day one, we've got to look at our priority of needs. Number one is safety and security. Number two is sheltering. And number three is water. Okay. So safety and security is going to include, hey, is anyone injured? Does anybody have some health or medical concerns we need to address? Because those are pretty quick. If somebody gets hit by a shard of glass in a tornado, are they bleeding such that I need to apply a tourniquet? Do I need to know how to do CPR, first aid, or something of that nature? That's priority number one. Is anybody injured, hurt, medically need attention? Sheltering is I'm immediately going to start looking for shelter. What kind of clothes do we have on? How do those clothes relate to the environment, the climate, the weather that we're currently experiencing that day? What's it look like? Is it today here in Kentucky where I'm located, it's raining and it's cool. I wouldn't say it's cold. If it was cold, it'd be snowing, right? So for me to get soaking wet and not have clothes that continue to insulate me when I'm wet, that's a problem. So if I'm with other people, I'm immediately looking at what those people have on. If it's me and my wife, I'm looking at my wife. Does she have the clothes on that she needs? Typically I do, because I think like this all the time. But if we were going out to dinner in Lexington, I might not have those clothes on, but I'll probably have them in the vehicle ready for both of us. I don't want to get too far from that kind of stuff. And then water would be next on that list. I want to start looking for that. You can last quite a while without hydration, but your body becomes pretty non-functioning if you don't have hydration within the first 3 or 4 days. Therefore, hydration is going to be a much higher need than food stores and calories. So that's what I'm looking for: safety and security, sheltering, and then water.
It was interesting because John and I were talking about go bags versus things at home versus in your car. I grew up in West Virginia. John obviously grew up in Kentucky. And for us, it was always a seasonal thing. Your bag in the car changes up the season. So when it becomes winter, you have ice stuff, gloves, blanket, ways to get warm. It's interesting when you move to the South or more like urban environments, all that's out the window because you're 5 feet from the closest Walmart or grocery store. But we were just talking about obviously what we've seen in Western North Carolina, where those things can change quickly and all of a sudden overnight you're cut off from people for the next 2 weeks. And how, now thinking about not just having safety and security at home with what you have at home, but also when you travel, what do you have in your travel bag that can keep you safe if you're stuck in a city overnight or something like that. So maybe talk a little bit about the different aspects of what you need to have with you all the time versus what you should probably have at home all the time just to be ready.
Well, I think the reason I approached the subject the way I did is looking at our priorities and needs in that order. They are safety and security no matter where you are. Yeah, safety and security is a broad-reaching topic that includes situational awareness, how to make sense, how to see things, what kind of tools can you carry for your self-defense if you need to carry tools.
Right.
Do you have the training to utilize those tools? Avoidance and awareness strategies, just so you're paying attention. It usually gets lumped into this topic called situational awareness. Like yesterday, my wife and I are working on a project. I'm writing an article for a magazine. We were trying to get shots of people and places that were sketchy, places that are safe, anchor points, habitual areas, all these things. She's focused on utilizing her camera to take photos. I'm not going to let her go anywhere and do anything without having her back. Because we're in places I would consider sketchy. She's focused on her work, which is difficult. And somebody needs to have her back. It's a simple thing. We're in a parking garage. It's dark. She's trying to get a shot of the parking garage where it's dark. That's the kind of place where bad people hang out. And I don't want my wife going there by herself, So from an urban, for those of us, me being one of them, I live in suburban, small town America. I don't live in a large city, but I do live in a neighborhood. Going to a larger city for me, Lexington, Kentucky, I've got to take in that situational awareness, that safety and security first. I take the tools that I know how to utilize and I train with. That includes 30 years of teaching combatives training, both armed and unarmed. The tools that I carry to effect my self-defense, both armed and unarmed. I have them with me at all times, and I have training to effectively use them. No matter where I go, whether I go to Lexington to do a photo shoot with my wife or I drive to Wisconsin to teach survival, I have with me what it'll take for me to walk home from wherever I go. And a lot of that has come from, I serve on the National Disaster Resilience Council, which is basically a think tank. It's a collective of brainiacs coming together from all the alphabet soups, trying to put a plan together for America when we are hit with an EMP, not if, but when we are hit with an EMP, because that is going to happen. We know it's going to happen. So how do we prepare for that? I have a small role in that compared to some of the bigger folks. But one of the things that comes up from an EMP attack that is going to happen is cars are not going to be a thing. Overpasses and bridges and stuff, they're going to be clogged. You're not going to be able to drive home from anywhere. You're going to have to walk home. Related to what you all just experienced, there was a super nice lady. She came out of Western North Carolina for a wilderness survival class that we had about a month ago. She came out the week after all that happened and had to come out. Fortunately, her neighbors had a bulldozer and they fixed the road she was coming out on. She really wanted the training before that event happened, but after it happened, she definitely wanted more training.
Yeah.
And we were kind enough and happy enough to be able to help her, but she was kind enough that on Saturday night of class, we interviewed her and said, okay, what was your experience in the middle of this thing? What kind of things came up? What kind of things were useful? And the big one that she kept saying over and over, and you all mentioned it already, is just the ability to work with other people. Communication skills with your neighbors. Her home where she lived was fine, but there's a creek in front of it. And on the other side of the creek, the house directly across the creek that they could stand across the creek and talk to one another, that house was gone.
Wow.
And the people in it were gone. It went from a situation where she's living her life, everything's fine. Those are my neighbors. We share stuff from the garden with one another, and those people are now gone. And so was their house. The thing that she kept mentioning was, hey, my neighbors down the holler had a bulldozer, or I had a chainsaw, or these people had this, and we all worked together. And it's one of the things that I have tried to emphasize in everything that I do, whether it's a podcast like this or my writing or my teaching, is that one of the big things is teamwork. We have forgotten in this country how to reach across the fence and shake hands with our neighbors and talk to them, or go across the cul-de-sac and say, hello, can I bring you a thing of bread? That's so remarkably bad for our country. It's saddening, quite frankly. In my little neighborhood, if we got the same sort of weather that you all got, I've tried my best to beat my neighbors. Some of them want it, some of them don't.
Right.
And so, you know, they're going to want my help if something bad happens.
They are.
Right?
You're the first person I'm knocking on the door.
And that's what everybody says. Here's what I did with one of my neighbors, and I'm just saying this to encourage your listeners to do the same thing. Either your listeners don't have skills or they have skills in this sort of topic. And if you do, then share them with everybody around you. We had a neighbor that moved in a few years ago, super nice folks, a couple of young kids. It's just not capable of taking care of his family in a disaster. So the first time we had any unexpected event, we had an ice storm, we lost electricity. My wife and I were solid as a rock. We're good to go. Within 4 hours of the electric going out, he was knocking on my door. Hey, do you have something that I can charge my kids' tablets and my cell phones and stuff like that? And here's what I did. I do have some extra supplies to share with people on purpose. And part of it is this purpose. I handed it to him and said, sure, here you go. But you can only take it if you agree to allow me to train you after this, because you're not ready. And so he took it, and then I helped him, got him into my online school. He's been studying with my online training, my Nature Reliance School online membership. And now he's much, much better and farther down the road than he was before. And fortunately, it took one day of, you know, we were out of electricity for 8 or 9 hours tops. It was nothing. But to them, and I'm not being critical of them, it was something really big. I was able to help them so that next time it's not as big of a deal and they're ready to go.
Yeah.
So tell us about your school, the Nature Reliance School. Tell us about the types of skills that you teach. If I were a beginner, and let's say it's me and not my brother who's worked with you in the past, where would I start? What would be the place to start? Well, thanks for asking. So Nature Reliance School was founded in 2006, and it was started as I was teaching combatives in martial arts. I had some of my students that were interested in training in outdoor topics, and I started teaching them, and it just grew. Okay. And it's grown to where it is now. I've written 8 books and, you know, trained federal law enforcement and U.S. military. It's just grown, and I'm very fortunate, feel very blessed to be in the positions that I've. For the average person starting out, what we teach that most people would absolutely love is what I would call our wilderness safety and survival course. The way we teach it is we're really focused on education. We're teaching people in a way that they can retain that information, which is important. It's not just to come there and be entertained. It's not just a lot of military folks call embrace the suck moment, where they go do hard things and they're better for it. There's nothing wrong with that, learning how to be comfortable in uncomfortable situations. But I want you to bring the kitchen sink. I want you to bring it all. If you got a camper, bring it so that you can listen to
me and our other instructors teach, you can retain that information and then you can leave with it. And it's a camping trip. Now, is it a little awkward? Yeah, because you're in an unfamiliar place and you're with unfamiliar people. We teach you how to get past all of that. We teach you how to be comfortable in the outdoors. We teach you how to be comfortable with other people. We teach you how to communicate effectively, work with others. And then you can take those skills and apply them to no matter what you do in life, whether you're a therapist, a financial CEO, a podcaster, whatever it is that you do, you can apply those principles wherever you go. And that's sort of where we would start. Now, those that want to continue training, we have extended levels of that same training, level 2, level 3, where people walk in the woods with a knife, just like I did. I've got 3 guys in particular out of Louisville, Kentucky. They came to Wilderness Safety and Survival last year. And next month, they're going to walk in the woods with nothing but a knife. Those cats are ready to rock and roll. They're pumped. They're excited. But realistically, we're going out for 3 days. As long as we maintain our core body temp, they're going to be alive anyway, right? So, but that does help people learn how to do things they're just not comfortable doing, which all of us need to do more of. The more we deal with stressors, the more we deal with things we're not comfortable with, the better we are at dealing with whatever comes our way that's uncomfortable. To answer your question, that would be our first one. We have a host of other skills, whether it's land navigation. I teach a lot of tracking, both man tracking and animal tracking. We have a course called Nature Immersion. I'm a certified master naturalist. I'm also an instructor in our Certified Master Naturalist program for the University of Kentucky. I have numerous instructors that assist me, and sometimes I am their students in those classes. And so, it's just quite a range of things that we do, and we try to make it easy for people to get started with this.
Nice.
Yeah, we were really amazed to look on the site and see the details of types of classes you have, from broad all the way down to focus on identifying plants and things like that. So you do offer such a wide range of things for people who are interested in different aspects of us. It's very comprehensive and diverse. It's pretty cool.
Well, and we try to make it easy too, because from just running a good organization, there's a lot of people that don't want to make the trip to Kentucky. Right. We have our online school too. So you can study all of those topics online at home with your iPad. And then I have practical applications for all those lessons. I'll teach you edible and medicinal plants. I'll teach you how to track. I've got courses for all that's in my online school as well. That way you study right there at home. It's an easy way to get started, and you can get going wherever you're located. Because we know, the end game is this. My goal is to get people outside. If I have to start you on your couch with an iPad, studying with me so that you feel comfortable with some of these topics, that's where I want you to start. I'll meet you where you are and help you, because we know there's too much data, too many statistics that prove that being outside is healthy. It's good for all of us. So I'm doing everything I can to get more people out there.
Do you find, especially the pandemic and the lockdown was a big change for everyone, do you think there's a difference between people going outdoors and going outside maybe, 20 years ago versus now, and sort of our reluctance to do less and stay in our homes more? Because I heard you talk earlier also about not knowing your neighbors. I've lived in the same house for 20 years and I know all my neighbors. I wouldn't say we're close, but we know who has the chainsaw and the tractor and all those things. But I feel a cultural shift or change has happened as we've become more tied to our digital selves. What do you think about that? Has there been a cultural shift from your perspective? So,
definitely.
How can we help
Nature Reliance School?
The EMP.
Right. Yeah, the EMP, all of that. So even in our daily lives, like you talked about getting to know your neighbors, sharing things, learning to communicate with people. And I assume that you have some of that information online as well as in person to help people.
Yeah. For example, I have a leadership course in my online training on how to communicate effectively with others. There's a time to lead and a time to follow. If you know how to control your ego, you know when to sit down and shut up and listen to this person. And there's a time for me to step up and be the man. In my particular case, I'm going to be the man. I'm going to lead. The ego drives that. And knowing how to control your ego so you know when to shut up and when to stand up and talk is really critical. But to get back to your original question, yes, I think there's been a huge shift. And I actually feel, and I'm just being as frank as I can, I think there's a shift back towards doing stuff outdoors again. I think we've gone indoors. I think we've gotten habituated to devices, and I think we are starting to see that it's not good for us. Did COVID help that or hurt that? I think it helped it. I think people being forced to go inside There were a lot of people that
Yeah.
said that we should stay home. I did not stay at home. There was no way. You're not keeping me in the house. It ain't going to happen. To the point that we had some government intervention. Like my wife went to the public library grounds during the midst of that to just walk around and be around the trees because there were some flowers and stuff going on. And she got the police called on her. Thank goodness I trained them. And so they're like, hey, Jennifer, what's up? And they're like, some busybody called about you and, just carry on, do what you want to do. For me, and I'm not trying to get political or anything, it was good. Everybody realized it was good to be outside. A lot of people have come outside immediately following COVID was the busiest time we've ever had at Nature Reliance School because people were coming out in droves to take courses and get training. Yeah. Some other things that I feel are promising, which I bring up because I think it's surprising to most people. A couple years ago, I taught an introduction to hunting class. And I was hoping to get 5 or 6 people because it was a new topic. I thought a lot of people were just not interested in doing this. They'd rather just go to the grocery store. I had 25 people show up, and nearly all of them were early 20s. All of them. Yeah. What was supposed to be a 3 to 4 hour class ended up going about 12 hours because of the questions that people had. They were really into it. I utilized some of the things that I learned by working with people that are new to that topic. I put a lot of content out about that in my writing for magazines and my blog and stuff. And what I found is that there is a lot of people that want to be what I call self-reliant. They want to take care of their own needs. And you all said it earlier, whether it's homesteading, killing your own domestic animals and taking care of them, raising your own garden, or hunting wildlife, people want to take care of their own food sources more. There's not as many hunters out there, but I think it's growing again in the young demographic, the early 20s. I'm seeing the numbers. Yeah. And that to me is very promising that people are wanting to take ownership of their own food.
I definitely think there's a larger, which I'm excited about. And you've said so many things and I'm like, oh my gosh, we could go off because John and I were talking about this yesterday, being in North Carolina, we've read all of the 1 Second After books, that whole series about the EMP, and then obviously what's happened in Western North Carolina. But I do feel like there's been a move because we've had now in 5 years, we've had the pandemic, a lot of large disasters over time continuing. We've had riots, we've had civil unrest, we've had all these things happening in such a condensed time frame that I do feel like people, us included, have this move towards like, no one's necessarily coming to save you. So you better get stuff together to take care of yourself effectively, understand your resources locally. We were talking about identifying spaces, going into parks, going into movie theaters, what we're doing. And I'm like, I'm always looking for exits. I'm looking for strange people. But then also like where are the local food sources are in an urban environment? How are we identifying those things? I do think that people are moving more towards that. Even suburban folks who maybe have never thought about it before are looking for how can I live and be holistically protected in this current situation. So I feel like it's an aspect of all these things happening in such a condensed time period.
Hey, listen to this funny story. So I've trained a lot of law enforcement officers and worked with several of them here in my hometown. My hometown's Winchester, Kentucky, close to 35, 40,000 people. It's a small town, rural America. They asked me to come down. They have a local radio show, and I'll go down there and talk about topics like this on a regular basis. And they had me come down to the police department and do a presentation on disaster readiness one time. I was there speaking for an hour, and the director of emergency management was speaking for an hour on a kit because they offer a kit through emergency management here. Okay. So I do my thing. I talk about what we're talking about now, probably more focused and in depth because we've had a range of topics here, but really focused on disaster readiness, right? And one guy sits through my presentation, sits through the other guy's presentation. He did a fantastic job. There was a table and this one gentleman said, hey, I have a question. Hey, Craig, I understand all that stuff you're telling me, but I want to know in a long-term bad disaster, where are they going to bring the food trucks? I want to know where they are. It was serious. Okay. It was serious. That's all he cared about. He did not care about his sheltering. He did not care about his safety and security. He did not care about the water. All he wanted to know was where he was going to go to the food trucks to get food. And again, I had the same reaction. I laughed because I thought he was joking. And he wasn't joking. He got mad because my contact there was like, sir, there aren't going to be any food trucks. there are no food trucks in large scale disasters for many days, if not weeks. You need to listen to what Craig's told you. He had blown all that off. All he wanted to know about, and that, unfortunately, is a segment of our population as well. Completely dependent upon others. No one is coming to save you. You need to prepare yourselves. And some people don't know that. And some people, even though they have heard that, don't want to hear that. They want to depend upon somebody else to fix their problems because they themselves have never been uncomfortable. They've never lifted weights. They've never stayed out overnight in a scary place. They've never had that hard conversation with anybody. They've just lived a moderately simple, easy existence, and they've never dealt with anybody hard, which breaks my heart for people. Because, I mean, a lot of our growth comes from doing hard things. It's important that we do hard things on a regular basis.
I talk to my kids. I have a 10 and 12-year-old, and I'm currently helping coach basketball for the middle school. And that's one thing you guys have to understand, that this is easy. This is gravy for you guys. Like, it's going to get harder. And the better you can get at handling, there's a great coach here at Duke, the Duke women's basketball coach. He says, get good at hard things because it doesn't stop. This is life. Life is hard things. The better you can get at dealing with the hard things, the better you will exist, the better you're able to move through. I think that's so huge. When you're not ready for that, I quote this quote every time we do a podcast, but it's like that Mike Tyson quote that everyone has a plan till they get punched in the face.
Right.
You have to know it's coming whenever you meet young people and they're just kind of blissfully floating through. I'm like, oh, you just haven't gotten punched in the face yet. It's coming. Be prepared for those things to come to you. Know the right people. Know the person to call who has the chainsaw. Know the person who could help, dig a road and that kind of stuff.
My approach to self-reliance and survival is mindset, skills, tactics, and gear. We've kind of danced around all those subjects, but those are four interlocking pieces of a puzzle of self-reliance and survival. You got to have the right mindset, which is what we were just discussing, how to learn to be comfortable in uncomfortable situations, how to do the hard things, how to handle things when you get punched in the face. Skills are all the basic skills of sheltering, fire building, water purification and filtration, that sort of thing. Tactics is my fancy word for teamwork. One definition of tactics is the strategic methodology of working with others to come to a strategic end. That's just one definition of tactics. Basically, sticking your hand over the fence and shaking hands, knowing your neighbor, know who's got the chainsaw, which is the metaphor we keep talking about. And then the last piece is gear. Most of the people that are listening to us today, and most of the people that I'm blessed to be able to work with, they do the skills thing okay, and they do the gear thing, but they very rarely get the mindset portion and very rarely get the teamwork portion down. And so that's why I emphasize those four puzzle pieces as being integral, being just as each one of them are just as important as the other. And it doesn't matter if you're learning how to play basketball on a team or you're learning how to prepare for a tornado destroying your house. They're all the same. Build your mindset, build your skills, know how to communicate and effectively work with others, and know what gear is the best gear to have when you need it.
That's really good advice. I've got so many things that I could bring up here. I want to go back just a tiny
2-hour podcast.
Yeah, I want to go back just a little bit to you talking about young people getting interested in this.
Sure.
I have a 17-year-old boy. He's a senior in high school. He's getting ready to go to college. 3 years ago, he asked for an axe for Christmas. He asked for a hatchet. And because he was like, well, I got the big axe. Now I need the little one. And then the next year, he asked for a couple of knives. It's been interesting to just see, because that's not really a large part of our lifestyle and the way that I live. It's been interesting to see that he and his friends have become attracted to these type like outdoor activities and the idea of like, I just want to learn how to cut down a tree. I want to learn how to, do it safely. I want to learn how to use these different manual tools, not even power tools. I can reinforce from a personal perspective that it is interesting that he and his friends, even though they are Zoomers and live a digital life, they're really kind of rebelling against that in a lot of ways because they want to get outside. So I wanted to throw that out there. And I was excited to see it as well. You're even seeing it with the high school boys.
For my age, I'm 55. I'm older than you guys. But for my age, it was My Side of the Mountain was the book I read in elementary school, or Hatchet or those things. Even though I did grow up in a family where we did outdoor stuff, those kind of things kind of pushed me towards survivalism, if you will. Today, there are so many resources, so many pieces of content out there for that age group, whether it's YouTube videos or some of these shows like Naked and Afraid, which is one of the most popular ones. The cool thing about those shows is that I've worked on Naked and Afraid. I've been on America's Most Wanted. I've been on CNN and Fox News and a lot of the big stuff that's out there related to these topics. What everybody thinks about that stuff is true. There's so much silliness that happens on. There's a lot of things that happen behind the scenes. But what they do very well is they get people interested in these topics so that some kid wants an axe. Yeah. Or whatever, whether it's YouTube or Instagram or Snapchat or whatever. And so they get an axe and then they find out, I did this with my son. My son, when he was 12-years old, he wanted a big old axe and he had a goal to chop a tree down. So I got him an axe and I found him a dead tree that he could chop down and let him chop it down. And it took him a few hours and he never wanted to chop another one. He learned a very valuable lesson and he's like, I want to learn how to run chainsaw now. It doesn't mean that and he does a lot of really hard things for work now, but it was those kinds of experiences that, calluses on the hands or cut hands because she's actually done some work. I feel sorry for those that have never done anything where they had to work for themselves, whether they got dirt under their fingernails or whatever. We all need to be doing that. It's pretty exciting to hear that your son wants that kind of stuff. Exciting to me, at least.
That's his uncle's influence, I think, a little bit.
Maybe.
Well, John and I were talking about when we grew up. We grew up before cell phones, even before internet really came out. And so it's like there was one TV in our household that had 2 channels when it was a clear day. Right. Mostly it was on the news. Yep. Once my dad got home, it was off limits. And so we were just out in the woods building tree forts, climbing up to deer stands and jumping. I was having a weekend with my old girls from West Virginia. I was like, where was our parents? I don't remember any of them. Right. I know they would just feed us and then we'd go back out and we talked to our kids about how we grew up. It's in their mind so idyllic because they don't that's a totally different experience. I'm like, we would just be out all day building tree forts and we'd come home, play in the gutter, play in the creek, and then come down here. And, that I think there is a desire to return to that because it's so counter to growing up completely digital.
Yeah. Yeah. And let's talk about some reality here too. I very distinctly remember when my childhood changed. I had a very similar experience where it was like, come back in at dark and eat and then go to bed and get back up and do it again tomorrow. Yep. It was on summer vacation kind of thing. And I distinctly remember that I'm not trying to bring anything down, but it's just true. There was a guy that was kidnapping children in a local area where I'm from. And so I was not allowed to go out anymore by myself. And I remember I was just sick, absolutely sick over it because I had spent every day of my freedom up to that point. I didn't have to have a job other than, I grew up on a farm, so I always had work to do. But because of that particular instance, life changed for me. And that changed for a lot of people. A lot of that started happening. And I think that's a sign of our culture as well. That pushed a lot of people to be inside more. One of the things that I'm seeing now is a lot of that stuff is happening online. Yeah. These aggressors, these people that go after children, they're doing it online now. So let's get them outside so they can get away from those. It's almost like
100%. Yeah.
Yeah. Which I think is a beautiful thing that we're shifting away from where these aggressors are doing their dirty work. And so, that's a good thing that I see as a cultural shift.
There's a book that just came out recently called Anxious Generations, written by Jonathan Haidt. He talks a lot about the online world. And the book in particular talks about this shift of childhood from the 90s, 80s, when all that, kid abductions were happening and parents started to pull in more. It's really good. Started to distrust your neighbors. And that kind of goes back to what you were saying with community, that it's like when we don't have community with each other, that we don't know. And it used to be like, we'd go down the street and be like, oh, well, text me when you're in your friend's house, and someone would be like, oh, my neighbor would call him on like, oh, Maari fell off her bike, but everybody was watching everybody.
Right.
And then when that shift started to happen and that distrust started to seed, people stopped talking to each other, which is we're seeing that now with the political climate in the world. And I think it's like that scenario has kind of taken and pulled everybody inside, and people close their garage doors at 5:00 and then don't talk to each other.
Yeah, I agree.
So it is a really good business. It also talks about the influence of social media on how people's mental health is. And this actually brings up another good question, but of all the different scenarios that you've seen, disasters, just different unrest and things, what is one that makes you the most nervous for?
EMP.
And what is one you think EMP, unprepared?
I don't need to hear anything else that you're going to ask me to know to answer that question. And here's why. So you mentioned earlier, 1 second afters brought the idea of EMPs to the forefront of a lot of people that didn't know it was even a thing. I can tell you from working with these think tank folks that actually have studied. I mean, they've got a manual you all this thick on this topic, right?
Yeah.
And it's not, and again, the book is good, but to sit and listen to people that understand logistics and the strategics of what's going to actually happen would scare anybody to death. Meaning, the big one I share because it's easy to remember the numbers is 60% of the population will be dead in 30 days. I mean, it's just expected. 90% of the population will be dead in 60 days. Wow. And if you think about how many people that will be, and I mean, this is not 1 second after. This is people that study this topic basically for a living.
That's terrifying.
Thinking this is what's likely to occur if we get hit. And don't get me wrong, this is a large scale EMP where our country gets shut down. Right. We know that there are people that are actively trying to do this. They're actively doing it right now as we're on this podcast. If they were able to accomplish their goals, then that's where we are. We're in the Stone Age with a bunch of people that don't know how to be in a Stone Age. For those of us that do know how to exist in a Stone Age, then we're hopefully going to be that 10%, really.
Right.
But if you're not, what I like to say is that I hate to throw out doom and gloom and not have an answer for it. So here's my answer. You've got to talk to your elected officials. You've got to pay attention to elections, to your local politics, your national level politics. Don't sit it out. Make your voice be heard on local boards related to these sort of topics. I'm not saying that everybody has to revolve around an EMP, but if you start looking into our lack of preparedness for EMPs, you're going to start getting people to give you answers. That's what I've done on a local level. And if we have a bigger voice, those kind of things happen for disaster readiness, whether it's a flood, Western North Carolina or whatever, having generators standing by, having emergency management organizations that have actual preparations. They're not just putting little survival kits together that nobody ever uses. Have some generators there. Make sure we got chainsaws. Make sure we have a listing of people that have chainsaws and bulldozers. We know who to get in contact with and how to get them. All those sorts of things that happen in a large scale event that, is likely to kill a bunch of people if we don't do something about it.
Yeah, and it's interesting to think about the fact that something like an EMP has never happened before. And so it's not something that we can wrap our minds around. We can think about natural disaster, hurricanes, earthquakes, tornadoes. All of us have experienced some version of the fallout from something like that. But an EMP is much like the pandemic was. The pandemic was something that we saw in the movies, and it was like, yeah, we know this is a possibility, but the last time this really affected us was the Spanish flu, and that was 100 years ago, and then it hit. But this thing you're talking about has never happened on a large scale in human history.
People process information in very interesting ways. Most of us have cognitive and normalcy bias on nearly every subject that goes through our minds. When they hear EMP and realize that would be a huge event that would cause a problem, their normalcy bias kicks in and goes, okay, never experienced that. Probably not going to happen. This guy doesn't know what he's talking about. That is human nature because the normalcy bias, we're just lazy. We're a lazy species compared to some other species. The human species is lazy. And there's good reason for that, for the way we've come to be how we are, which is, we saw certain things happen like agriculture, and it was a lot easier than foraging and hunting. We started growing, our life expectancy extended, and now we can go to the grocery store and get our foods and our water. Most people will dismiss the idea of an EMP because it's going to take some work to get ready for it. And people just don't want to put the work in. Those people are going to die. They're not going to make it through a large scale EMP. And I pray that we don't have an EMP. I don't want to see it. But I'm not going to stick my head in the sand and not get prepared for it either.
Yeah.
Well, and I think with a lot of disasters, we kind of see this in Western North Carolina. We have a property out there, and all the things that you've talked about with the community coming together. I've seen that people in Western North Carolina are amazing and have come together to do a ton. The interesting thing with small and big things is that there's such a layered effect. There's no water, no sewer, no electricity, which means I can't use my cell phone to get help. I can't do anything to reach out. I can't tell anybody I'm okay. Then it starts to layer on. It's like day 2. I still don't have power. Now I need a fridge. I need food. Well, now my food's gone because there's no power. And you start to forget, and I want to get a drink of water. I go turn the faucet on and there's no water. It takes a while for all of those layers to really encompass the situation you're in. And then it's been days and you haven't made any kind of movement. Even going up there to check on our property and neighbors, you realize just in a small aspect how much you're unprepared when all those layers start to kick in. You're like, okay, well, now we have propane, but we have enough propane for, 2 days. We have enough gas to run a generator for 3 days. Like, no, but the roads are washed out, so we can't go get gas. And since we don't have gas, now we can't run the car to get gas anyway. So just this layering effect of survival that you don't think through until you're in the situation, but you need to think through that stuff before that situation comes up. Yeah. So it doesn't work.
And I'm thankful for people like you all putting a podcast like this together to at least give some of the people that don't want to stick their head in the sand the opportunity to start running this through their mind. I'm a resource. I can help people any way that I can.
Right.
But at the very least, get people to thinking about these sort of things. We all need to be thinking about them for sure.
Right. Yeah. And that's when we were coming up with topics for the show and talking in the fall. All of this was fresh in our mind. So when we talked about survival and all of that, of course, you popped into my brain immediately. I'm thankful that you took the time to talk to us today about all of this on our podcast. So as we wrap up here a little bit, we've been talking for almost an hour. We normally go through what we call a lightning round. It's just some quick questions that we have for you. Sometimes these turn into 2-minute, 3-minute answers, but whatever comes to your mind is fine.
I'll be short.
Yeah, it's totally fine. But they're sort of on topic, but they can be a little off. So, so this first one is, what is really the best way to start a fire without matches? There are all these different ways.
Lighter.
A lighter.
You should have a lighter. And the backup for your lighter should be another lighter. And the backup for that is a ferrocerium rod.
Okay.
And
you don't have to get fancy. Just have some lighters.
I did a video yesterday for Instagram on throw your matches out, get a lighter, get a backup lighter, and then I get a ferrocerium rod as a backup to that.
Okay. Great. We will link to that video if you've got it handy. Send it to us. So what would be the most and least ideal climate or terrain to be stranded in? So we're thinking, what would be the most ideal and then the least ideal? A desert island is probably a pretty bad place to be.
Yeah. I don't have a lot of experience outside of CONUS, so I don't know about weather and climate in a lot of parts of the world. I wrote a kid's book on this subject, and I had to do a ton of research for that. But I would say something along the lines of your northern, southern states here in the U.S. The further south you get, the hotter it is in the summer, more insects that you run into, and insects can be very problematic. So anytime you can get into the mountains of North Georgia, where you might have some cooler temps or some, I guess a better way of saying is moderate temps, would be not a bad idea. That's if I could go anywhere, that would be idealistic. For me, the worst place north, it's going to surprise people, but I think I would much rather be in a cold climate trying to get warm than a warm climate trying to get cool. I've taught classes. We've taught level 3 classes, which is knife only, where we've done it in cold weather, and we've also done it in hot weather. And I'm telling you right now, my students struggled more in the hot weather class than they did in the cold weather one. We were just so hot and so wore out from the heat. We did not want to do anything. And we had to boil water over and over again just to stay hydrated. And there were times we were like, I am done. I do not want to do it. Can you do it? And that's where the teamwork came in, because we were just wore out.
No,
surprising.
That's really surprising when you start to think about where we as humans began. We always think about equatorial places having the biggest populations. When you look across the world, those places tend to have the biggest populations, and the colder you get, the smaller the population. So it's interesting that you have a different...
Realistically, it's probably harder in the colder temps. That's a tough one, man.
I don't like mosquitoes, so...
I could go either way. I'll put it that way. But I'll stick with my answer, but I could go either way on that one.
All right. So if disaster strikes in the suburbs, where are you taking shelter if our homes are not an option? Let's say my home was washed away.
Somebody else's home that is part of my framework, my team, family, close relative, neighbor that we're close to. The one thing that I try to get across to people is this whole mindset of go bags, like leaving everything behind, is stupid. If you can avoid it altogether, do everything you can to fortify, secure, and make your home a great place to be. In your scenario that you're giving me, which is hard, we don't have it anymore for whatever reason, I want to go to another home. because going and living off the land, lone wolf, Jeremiah Johnson and all that stuff is, it's an impossibility for most of us. For me, 55, I've done judo for 30 years. My body doesn't work well anymore. Me going out and living off the land again at this age, I don't want to do that either. I do it in short spurts to help people and train people. I will do it if I have to, but I don't want to do that either.
So find some other people, friends that you can walk to, probably.
I think that's why you need to have a good network. You need people. You need your neighbors. It might be your neighbors that you go and live in their garage because that's all you have available to you. Just make sure you got good neighbors and a good network.
Yeah. All right, last one.
Yes.
Do you have a favorite disaster movie?
Disaster movie.
Maari loves disaster movies. That's why we have.
We were going through the difference between disaster movies versus a dystopian after the disaster happens. This is the movie.
I have a good disaster movie, but it opens up the door for me to talk about the greatest movie ever made. You want to talk about that?
Which is
Last Mohicans.
Okay.
Oh,
greatest movie ever made.
My husband, every time we go to the mountains,
well, you should.
Whenever I'm like, stay alive. I will find you.
Exactly. Every year you should quote that movie because it's the greatest movie ever made. I really don't have a good disaster movie because I don't pay attention to them. Even more so after working on some of the Hollywood stuff. By contract, I can't say much, but just working on some of the Hollywood stuff, even less so do I want to watch that kind of garbage.
Right.
Yes.
Maybe you'll get a chance to work on an EMP movie and they'll use you as an expert.
I'm down for being a subject matter expert and helping people make a better movie. Yeah.
Make a better movie.
I worked behind the scenes on a couple of shows and I was able to make them better. No doubt about it. And I'm glad I was behind the camera instead of front of it because I didn't want to be in front of the camera. But for that, I'm an educator. I'm not an entertainer. There's a big difference. And so I would love to work with anybody that would want to hire me to help behind the scenes. That's for sure.
Cool. Well, thanks so much for being with us today and helping us learn how to be a little bit more prepared. Before we go, I just want to ask you, we've talked a lot about your Nature Reliance School. Can you tell people how to get in touch with you? Maybe your social media handles, the address for the Nature Reliance School. We'll put all of that in the description, but just give us a little idea of where we can find you online.
Yeah, thank you for asking. NatureReliance.org. That's my website, naturereliance.org. That's the hub for everything. The big thing I would like to get across to your folks listening is if you found anything that I stated today is, hey, you want to learn more, then at least take advantage of the free survival course. It's an online course that walks people through mindset skills, tactics, and gear. Just go to online courses on my website on the menu and take free survival course. Get into the membership. It's a paid membership. It's incredibly cheap to study with me online anywhere in the world. Jump into a class with us. The hub is naturereliance.org. I'm really active on Instagram and YouTube and Facebook. All of those are at Nature Reliance, so you can find me there. The best place to be online is in my membership. It's expanding greatly, particularly in 2025. So if anybody wants to study with me, then jump in there.
Nice. Great. Well, thanks.
Thank you all. Appreciate it very much.
This was fun. Thank you.
All right. Well, I can definitely say that talking to Craig was enlightening, a little bit frightening, a lot of fun.
I know. I think we're sitting there and I was like, I just want to talk to him so much more. We could have spent the rest of the afternoon going into each of those little topics and going for hours. You can obviously tell he loves what he does and he's just a wealth of information. So that was a lot of fun and very interesting. And yes, slightly terrifying.
Slightly terrifying, especially when you talked about the EMP. Yes. That's something that I'd never considered or thought about. And now I'm going to lose some sleep over it. But
John's going to start wrapping his house in tinfoil after we get off this call.
Yeah. How can I build a Faraday cage around my home? We didn't talk about that, but maybe we'll have him back on for another episode about how to protect your home and your car so that it still runs. So what are we going to quit now after this conversation?
Yeah. So I wrote down that I'm going to quit postponing being prepared. I think that we tend to have, my husband and I are pretty good at preparedness. And we have some stuff, we do some stuff, we think about it when we probably also because now with Craig, but also with Terry, our previous guest, have gotten us thinking about identifying, situational awareness, identifying when we're going places, what are we going to be encountering, all those things have kind of been in our minds for a couple of years. But, talking and hearing from Craig has made me realize, okay, there's still holes in things. I mean, I'm not prepared for an EMP, not that anyone is, but even down to like, do I have the right things in my car for bad weather or an accident or that kind of stuff? So I'm going to quit postponing and focus on getting that done, spending the weekend or spending some time, making sure all those kind of systems are in place. Then I can know that I'm protected and prepared. So that's what I'm going to do.
I remember driving home. I just bought a new truck and I drove it to my family's house for the holidays. It was so new that I didn't have my emergency kit in the car. And we pop open the trunk and the first thing my brother says is, "Where's your emergency roadside kit? What happens if you lose a tire?" I was just like, "It's fine. It's a new car." He's like, "You don't know that. Definitely going to prepare a little bit better." I think it makes a lot of sense. Having a change of clothes, having some blankets, maybe a little extra water in there just in case your car might overheat. You might need that gallon of water to get to the next gas station. That's a good one. I think I'm going to quit thinking that I'll be the first to go. Started off this podcast saying that I'd be the first one to go, but Craig has given me a little bit of hope if I prepare in the right ways and, I follow his steps for community, shelter, water, and then food. Maybe I can make it to that last 10% and help some people along the way.
I think so. I think you can do it. You can be running the band at the end of the world and I'll be making the t-shirts. So
yeah, maybe so. We're going to have to get through the first 60 days, apparently.
yes.
I could walk to your house. You could walk to my house. We can make it. Our families could band together to grow some food and make some t-shirts. I think that's possible.
I was actually really surprised by the conversation and the way it went. One of the big things that he talked about that I was super glad he brought up was how community is so important. That was one thing that made him nervous, that our community structure has really broken down. He and I we talked about Western North Carolina, what we've seen from people in the mountains. And I was amazed, surprised, and proud that when I was there visiting the mountains, the community pulling together and supporting each other. And I think I shared that there was no access to ATMs and banking machines. So they just had a big fishbowl full of cash. If you had extra cash, you could put it in there. If you needed cash, you could take it out. They're just like community trust. And that everyone came in and pooled resources, and they still are largely doing that in the mountains. In a lot of suburban environments, they are a little bit more transient, that there isn't that community connection so much. It's like, do you know your neighbor? Or your neighbor's watching out for your kids? Or your neighbor's going to be there if you need to borrow the chainsaw? And so I put that in my list of things that I wanted to start, was based off of him bringing up that takeaway of community being so important. I'm going to make it a point this year to try to get to know my neighbors even better than just like the wave at the mailbox. I thought that was really great.
It's interesting to think about the idea of cash as we become a more cashless society. There's a lot less of it around. I rarely carry cash anymore. I used to never leave the house without at least a little cash just in case. Like maybe you do want to put just a little bit of money under the mattress, not all of it, but just a little just in case. For me, my takeaway was about the mindset side of things. Craig talked a lot about thinking in terms of self-reliance. Obviously, his school is the Nature Reliance School, and that word reliance is very important to him. But just starting to take some ownership over your own needs in these types of situations and thinking in terms of like, I'm responsible for me in this situation first and for my family. And then I'm responsible to my community, my neighbors. If I'm not thinking in terms of self-reliance and none of my neighbors are thinking in terms of reliance, then we're all going to be in a much more difficult situation. Going back to your community thing, just knowing who has the different tools, knowing who's good at gardening and who's good at cooking or any other practical skills, fixing machines, any of those types of things. It just means that we need to go out there and meet our neighbors. I know for me, I have a neighbor across the street from me who brews beer. So I should be okay when it comes to
That's your currency in the future.
my beer supply. Yeah, which will be great. But the mindset part of it too, just taking ownership over your own fate when it comes to being prepared, I think is important.
Yeah, I thought that was great. And my ego is a big part of it. For a lot of people who go into the wilderness with this idea that I'm out to conquer nature and put it under my control, and how that was how he was one of those people, and how that doesn't work. You really have to approach these things, kind of tampering down your ego and knowing where you are and knowing who you need to listen to. I thought that was a great mindset piece too.
Yeah, absolutely. Knowing when to speak up and then knowing when to stand up are two different things, for sure. Yeah.
So what are you going to start doing?
What am I going to start to do? I think for me, it's starting with the baby steps. I would like to attend one of Craig's weekends. I think it'd be a lot of fun. I think that's a good place to start. And I'm not just saying that to try to sell the service or anything like that. I've had family members attend his weekends and weeks. I know they've gotten a lot out of it, not just from the being prepared side of things, but from the community side, from meeting different people. He talked about the different walks of life, everybody that comes, where they come from, and the reasons that they're there. And so I'm going to start considering this idea that I can not be the first one to go, and I'm going to start to prepare a little bit better, and I'm going to add a few more blankets into the trunks of my cars and all those things that I know I should be doing that I haven't been doing. Assume AAA will always take care of me or whatever the situation might be. So that's what I'm going to start.
That's great.
Well, I think that about wraps it up for today. We want to thank Craig again for coming on the show. We definitely want to have him back to talk more about some of these other things, maybe get into more details. If you liked this conversation and want to hear more about a specific topic, please reach out and let us know what that might be. It'd be really interesting to hear from people who are listening. We will be back in a couple of weeks with another episode. Until then, I'm John.
And I'm Maari.
And we're reminding you that winners can quit and quitters can win.